time. It's our time, my friends. Time for millions of maturepreneurs, 55 plus, who are hashtag not done by a long shot, to revolutionize how we lead, do business, and innovate our world. I'm your host, Xanet Anderson, and welcome to my conversations with fascinating people who would rather inspire than retire. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of our podcast. And I'm really happy to have with me today, Xanet Pailet. I hope I said that right this time. And tell us where you're zooming in from, Xanet.
Oh, yes. Hi, everybody. And hi, Xanet. I am in Asheville, North Carolina.
All right. I, a long time ago, lived in North Carolina in Raleigh and Columbia, South Carolina for a little while. And Gainesville and Tallahassee, Florida, and all over the place, Atlanta. Love the South. And North Carolina is such a pretty state. It's really got a lot of things going for it. Okay, so today, everybody, we're going to be talking about power, pleasure, and prosperity, rewiring your relationship to sex and money. And those are two of my very favorite topics. So that's one of the reasons why I was really happy to have Xanet on with me today. So we're going to talk about exploring why sexuality and financial empowerment are linked, how social conditioning keeps especially women small, and why this inner work is essential for true freedom and success. And so you're really going to understand more about your connection between money fears and sex fears. Now, I don't care what age you are, what stage of life, really, if you're a man or a woman, but I think this particularly relates to, more women will relate to some of this, but there is a lot of social conditioning around money and sex that impacts our business decisions. And so transforming one transforms the other. Bonus. All right, so I'm going to do the formal introduction of Xanet today, and then we're going to find out some juicy tidbits behind the scene. And by the way, you get bonus points, Xanet, if they're like super racy, but whatever you want to share about yourself. Then we're going to launch right into not only the topic, but also your journey. So Xanet Pailet is a nationally recognized sex and intimacy coach, bestselling author of Living an Orgasmic Life, and founder of Passionate Intimacy Retreats. A former high-powered lawyer and business strategist, she now helps high-achieving women and couples transform both their relationship and their relationships with money. After leaving a 26-year sexless marriage, Xanet discovered how sexual empowerment and financial empowerment are deeply entwined. Through private coaching and luxury international retreats, she guides clients to break free from fear, claim their worth, and create emotional, sexual, and financial connections that last. Oh, that sounds like such juicy work. I love it. Okay, so now tell us something about you that we wouldn't guess, although I think after that, many people would probably say anything possibly goes, because you went from lawyer to sex and intimacy coach, and we're going to find out about that journey. But tell us something about you we wouldn't guess.
Okay, well, great question. Well, I think one thing you wouldn't guess is that when I was living in New York, I was also a Broadway producer of a number of wonderful musicals because I love musical theater.
That's so cool. That's very cool. Okay, so tell me, this is a complete random aside, but does producer basically just mean that you come up with the money or you find the money? Is that
Pretty much?
Okay, that's what I thought. Because you always see that, like the star that's in the movie is also the producer or the executive producer or whatever. So I always wondered what that role was. Okay, so that's very cool. Tell us a little bit about your journey from high-powered lawyer to sex and intimacy coach. When did you make that transition and why?
So I made that transition when I turned 50. About in my 50s, I would say. I had been living in a sexless marriage for 26 years.
Yeah.
And I finally got the courage There were a lot of fears that held me back, including, unsubstantiated money fears.
Yeah.
When I finally, found the courage to leave the marriage. And I also realized at that point that I really had some issues around sex, which is why we were in a sexless marriage to begin with. A lot of it was my issues, not so much my then husband. And I just decided, well, I'm 50 years old, only been married once, kind of want to date. I've always wanted to be in partnership with somebody. So I'm going to have to actually do something I don't want to do, which is to look at my own stuff, because I was really good at never looking at my own stuff.
Yes.
As many of us are.
Yeah,
exactly. And that really brought me into the journey of sexual healing. And I know you said tell you something juicy. So here's my juicy story.
Okay.
My first exposure to the concept that sex could actually be pleasurable as opposed to painful, which was my experience, was having a goddess worship session, which is basically a tantric session with a man I had just started dating who had just come back from a tantra workshop. And he was like, I want to give you a goddess session. And I'm like, I have no idea what that is. But I've never been treated like a goddess, so why not?
Yeah, exactly.
Right. And it was an amazing experience for me. He was very gentle. He was very kind. There was a lot of consent. He kept his pants on. So it was all about me actually receiving touch and pleasure. And was beautiful. And that actually began my journey of like, wow, I have no idea what just happened, but I need to learn more about this.
Yeah.
That was 15 years ago. So
wow.
It's been a long journey.
Yeah. Well, so first of all, let's talk about the fact that, so thank you for being so, open about everything, and the work that you do, I think, is so important because our society has so much stuff about talking about sex and money. And we need to get over both. So that's why I think it's really important and valuable to have this conversation. You mentioned 26-year sexless marriage, and many people may think, wow, that's pretty rare. It's not. I have, out of a circle of 4 close friends, 2 of them were in sexless marriages for many years, not the whole marriage. And so talk a little bit about that phenomenon, because it's not as common as we think.
Not at all as uncommon. We define a sexless marriage as having sex less than 10 times a year. So that puts a lot of people in that category. And it's a very common experience. The data shows about 25% of couples are in long-term relationships are in sexless marriages. But I think almost every sex therapist or coach I've ever spoken to is like, that data is just not accurate. It's a much higher percentage because people don't report. Yeah. And I think it's very common in long-term relationships that, sex maybe was amazing at the beginning when the new relationship energy was flowing and the hormones were there. And then children come into the fray often, and, nobody messes up a sex life more than having little kids. Yeah. That's the honest truth. And then I think couples stop making sex a priority, and very often it's fine. It's okay. It's not great. Nobody is really having a tremendous amount of enjoyment and pleasure, and they don't have the tools to be able to communicate and talk about it. And little by little, first you don't have sex for a month, and then it's 6 weeks, and then it's 8 weeks. And before you know it, it's 6 months. And it's a muscle. It's hard to get back into. How many couples have sat in my office and said, like, we haven't had sex in 7 years. Like, the thought of even doing it is scary. It's awkward.
Yeah. Well, and hormones get dormant, like I know when I've gone for quite a long time without sex, even if it's just by myself, it's not easy to get those hormones stirred up. Now, once they're stirred up again, they tend to stay stirred up for a bit. But that's a part of it as well, physiological, but certainly psychological too. Like you said, awkward and can feel even scary. And there's also a lot of power that comes into play when we talk about sex, because there's some power imbalances in marriages or in relationships. And that's a way that can be used to create that power balance. Because I've seen that, again, a lot of my friends' relationships where in many cases, the women may not have as much power economically or in whatever way. And so they use sex as a way to balance the scale, so to speak, right? Or so it's fraught. There's lots of dynamics that go on. So let's talk a little bit about this notion of pleasure and power and prosperity. How do you see them being connected? So sex and money are connected in your brain. How?
So sex and money are almost two sides of the same coin. There's power dynamics with money. There's power dynamics with sex. There's a lot of conditioning that we received about money growing up, like our money story or money blueprint, if you will, and the blueprint that we have around sex and intimacy, which are also the messages and the stories and experiences that we had as well growing up. So there's, just at the very base of as children, this is deeply, deeply formed inside of us. And I think that for women in particular, it's a very challenging area to navigate because so many women do feel disempowered in their body. They feel disempowered in their relationships. They feel disempowered in their business world as well. And, the correlation is that when we can connect to our body, connect to our pleasure, the energy starts to flow differently. And that energy starts to flow both in our business, right, where we're able to open up more to what we want, to be able to ask for what we want, to not have to play small, because I feel like so many women, like I, was basically conditioned to play small, get married, marry a lawyer or a doctor. That's what I was told. So I married a lawyer, became a lawyer as well, but don't dream big. Don't dream big. Don't have some dream of going to business school, which is what I really wanted to do, and, create your own business, right? You have to stay within the box that, society tells you to stay within. And what we're trying to do is really give women, empower them to be able to break out of that box and start to see the correlation between these two pieces and how beginning to heal both of them creates the power and the pleasure that we want in our body sexually, but also, the experiences and the success that we want to have in our business life as well.
Yeah. Well, let's follow that pleasure thread for a moment, because I know that one of the biggest challenges that a lot of women have, and there are times when I have that in my life as well, is when you say what gives you pleasure, and we're not just talking physical or sexual, we're talking just in general. What do you enjoy? What is pleasurable for you? What lights you up and makes you smile or laugh or giggle? So pleasure is not something that often gets put on the list, right? We're busy, we're doing this, we're doing that, we have all these responsibilities. And like you said, that prescription of you go to school, you get a good career, you advance in your career, and then you have 2.5 kids, pick a fence, et cetera, all the whole BS story that hasn't been the case since the 40s and the 50s. So almost, a century. But we're still kind of operating as if that story is the story that we need to live into. And then, of course, you retire, which is a completely outdated notion. So let's talk about pleasure and how do we find what gives us pleasure? Because when I ask many of my clients, what do you enjoy? What gives you pleasure? I get the deer in the headlights look, right? Or they say a couple of things like, well, I like reading and I like, baths. And then they trail off and then I get the deer in the headlights look. So tell me a little bit about pleasure and why is it so hard for us to know what it is? What gives us pleasure?
It's such a great question. I think pleasure is at some level a state of mind.
Mm.
When you're in the pleasure sense, right? You're in a way in which you're expansive. Every part of you is expansive. When I think about experiencing pleasure, I think about it happening not only in all five of my senses, but also, the activities that feel very enriching for me. Things that I love to do, like Sunday, I went paddleboarding and I was just sitting on the lake and hanging out on the paddleboard, and it was gorgeous, right? And that was such a sensual, pleasurable experience. Why don't we consider pleasure? I think this is also kind of ingrained in women, because I think men have a lot easier. I know men have a lot easier access to pleasure than women do. In a way, I think it's almost like there is a way in which society says, like, you're there to work and you're there to be a mother and, maybe to be a business person, but you're not entitled to actually having pleasure, because that means that you're just sitting back and being lazy, right?
Yep.
And not doing anything. And I think I think there's a way in which we've socialized women not to be able to express pleasure, not to be able to talk about it, not to be able to expect that they're going to experience it in their life, and not to be sensitized to how powerful it is when you are open to pleasure. So I do think it's like a mind shift paradigm. I never really thought of it that way, and you asked that question, but it's like, yeah, that's actually what's happening.
Yeah, I hear you. And I think there's also a great degree of permission needed and a feeling of worthiness or deserving. I deserve to have pleasure in my life. I deserve to be happy. And that's, again, not a message that we've been raised with. Now, as I was listening to you, though, I was thinking, okay, but I think this might be a fairly generational or demographic bias, or certainly more predominant in baby boomers and Gen X, and maybe even a few millennials. But from what I can tell, and what, the few young women I know, I don't think they have that same sense in the same way. They may have all sorts of hangups, but they have much more, whereas we thought we have to work hard, they think I work to live, not the other way around. I don't live to work. I work to live.
I work to live. Yes.
Yeah. And I think for them, pleasure is not a dirty word as much. Right. And so have you found in your kind of work that you've been doing, is it mostly women who are like 40 plus?
Yes, my average clients are in their like early to mid 40s. So I would say that there is definitely somewhat, I think you're right, there's somewhat of a generational issue there in terms of how younger women in younger generations have been taught differently, have more freedom, of expression, have more freedom in their body, have more ability to be able to experience the fullness, the richness of life in some ways. So I do think there's some generational shift there, but I do have clients in their 20s and 30s too, and some of them struggle with it as well, particularly around sex. I think that's and that may be the actual origin of it, right? Because I think so many women have been told that pleasure in sex is not for them, it's for their partner.
Yeah.
Usually their male partner, right?
Yeah.
And you're just there to service. And I think that's probably where some of this originates from, like the very beginning of, Adam and Eve. Mm-hmm. They got thrown out of the garden, right? Because they were having pleasure. Pleasure is sinful. I mean, it's probably also comes from, Judeo-Christianity as well, right? Like it's not, yeah.
Well, and I would, this might be controversial, but hey, that's how I roll. I would say almost all religions are patriarchal, and the patriarchal ones have sexuality for women as taboo or sinful or whatever, because it's a way to control half the population.
Totally.
So it's not just Judeo-Christianity. I think it's every patriarchal religion, which is most of them, unfortunately.
Most of them, right.
Okay, I want to go back to sex and money, because so we've been taught to not ask for much sexually, to not put ourselves first in the pleasure realm, to make sure everybody else is happy first, generally. And I know these are general statements, but by and large, they are very true for many, 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 many people in our generations. And how does that play out in terms of business? So I know what I see and what I've experienced myself in terms of how I hold myself back. But what do you see as the correlation, and how does it show up with women and their money?
I think it shows up in a number of different ways with women and their money. I think in business, the self-worth wound that so many women have hold us back from actually giving ourselves the worth that we're actually should be valued at. Right. I see this so much in like female professions, female entrepreneurial professions, therapists in particular, coaches, and, some of them as well. It's like, I'm charging $100 an hour. I'm like, damn, girl, you're worth way more than that.
Yeah.
Right. And so I think we have a really hard time, really understanding what our worth is. Like, if I change your marriage rather than getting a divorce, which is about what you were about to do when you walked into my office, and you leave, falling back in love with each other, how much money is that worth? Yeah. Right. And I think women have a really hard time with that. I think we also have a hard time asking for what we actually want, even in like negotiations, right? Like how many times do I hear, oh, I left money on the table? Like, you never want to leave money on the table. Exactly. But that happens a lot, again, because I think we're nervous, where there's a power dynamic that's going on, especially if you're negotiating with somebody on the other side who, has different genes than you do, right? Different DNA.
Yeah. And I just want to say, gentlemen, if you're still with us and you're still listening, I want you to listen with an ear to, does this apply to you? Because it's not only women who have some of these issues. If it doesn't, does it apply to some of the women in your life, your partner, your wife, your daughters? And if so, then what can you learn from this, and how can you take that into supporting them or having conversations with them? And if it's not someone in your life, like if you don't have women in your life, then in general, what is your version of this in your life? So we may be talking about women a lot, but make sure you apply this to you and your world, because you're dealing with women in your life. So this is important for you to know. So where do we start with this? What's a good starting point for women who may be feeling perhaps disempowered, disconnected from pleasure, disconnected really at its root from our right and ability to have pleasure in our lives, or to even know what it is and where to start? So where should we start with this?
Well, there's two different pieces, but I always feel like it's important to understand root causes and the belief systems that you have inherited, right? So whether it's about money or whether it's about sex, really looking at the messages that you receive, the stories that you have about money, the stories that you have about sex, and really understand those do not have to be your stories. Very often they were imposed upon you, or they were your experiences, right? Just because, I grew up in a family where, my mother took me to discount stores, doesn't mean that I can't go shopping at Saks and Bergdorf, right? But you don't really feel that way. I mean, those are the type of experiences that we actually have. And so it's the same thing with sex, just because, I grew up in a family where, I was told sex was dirty, right? It doesn't mean that you can't, enjoy sex and, even be your little slutty self if you want, because that's a very empowering place for women to be, to feel that super sexy, I'm a vixen, space. So I think we first need to understand where those beliefs come from, and then we need to rewrite them and understand they're not ours, and really check in with, well, what is my belief, right? What do I want to accomplish? How do I want to feel? What is my relationship with pleasure? Am I getting enough of it? Do I know what it is?
Mm-hmm. And do I allow it when it shows up?
Because do I allow it when it shows up? Right? Do I need permission?
Yeah.
Do I need to give myself permission?
Yeah, we call stuff in, but then we deflect it because it's like, oh, well, no, I can't have that. I know a lot of times we also push off of what we grew up with. So we either follow the same path or we go the other direction, depends on, how oppositionally defiant we are. And I'm quite oppositionally defiant. So my mom was an example of, got to have a man. Sex is for bartering to, you barter sex for affection, you barter sex for security, and money and so forth. So I kind of went the other direction to super independent. And, I still remember I was in a relationship with a man and we went into a store, I needed a quart of milk and he was going to buy it. And I was like, no, I'll get my own milk. And I remember being quite offended. It was a quart of milk, for the love of God. So for me, the journey has been how to receive without feeling obligated to pay for it. Right? So that was one of the lessons. And that's in both in sex and in business and in life in general. How do I be able to receive that abundance without having to compensate 5 or 10 times more?
Right.
Overgive. I think that's a fairly common one. And also, how do I allow pleasure without, having to pay for it?
Without having to give back, being able just to receive it from somebody and not having an obligation, which so many women feel like, oh, I'm taking too long, whatever it is, right? There's a way in which we can't just allow ourselves to settle in and just be like, yes, I am this beautiful person, this beautiful goddess, if that works for you. And I get to just receive pleasure. And I think that's, a very, very important experience for women to have.
Well, and the deflection of that, the deflection of receiving is what keeps us in kind of that scarcity and poverty mindset.
That's right.
Financially and in terms of pleasure. And it keeps our cups empty, right? Like we don't ever get filled up to that sense of abundant overflow where we're coming from that. And so in many ways, we're really doing a big disservice to people to not let them pour into us, because then we're coming from scarcity and from depletion, not from abundance and overflow. And we also deny them the joy of giving, which is really valuable. And in fact, we put them in the position of taker. And that's actually really, really, I consider that to be really bad form energetically, because, no one wants to be a taker. And then when we don't allow people to give or to have reciprocity or to give or whatever, that's what we're doing, is we're making them takers. And that's just rude. Knock that shit off. So anyways, let's talk a little bit.
I'm down with that.
Let's talk about some practical ways to figure out what does give me pleasure.
Okay. So one of the things I always work with women when they're really struggling on experiencing pleasure is, first of all, just starting really small. So again, all 5 of our senses are actually involved in the sensory pleasure experience. And that's, I think, a good space to start. Go out into your garden, right? Don't take your phone with you. Don't have any music on, or maybe have music on, and find a plant or a flower that you're really pulled to, that you're really attracted to, and spend some time just looking at it and getting curious about it, and then maybe smelling it, and then maybe just rubbing it gently or rubbing your hand gently over it. Starting to find pleasure means you have to be in your body. That's really where our pleasure centers are. It's very much within our nervous system. we can have pleasure doing things, but if you think about, well, what is it that creates that enjoyment for you, right? It's the rush. It's like the thrill of jumping out of an airplane. I would never do that, but you know what I'm saying? Like
3 times. I wouldn't do it again.
I knew you would have done that. So that's
3 times and I'm good. I don't need to do that ever again.
Great. And it was, at some level, the pleasure was like the huge dopamine hit that you got, right? The rush. And that's very, very sensory related. When you're connected with a partner and you're deeply connected and you feel a lot of love and connection, again, that's very much a sensory space. Maybe your heart feels warm. Maybe other parts of your body feel warm or tingly. And so going just really, really starting really small. And then I like to have people really just do some sensory, touching of themselves, just not because you're putting lotion on yourself because your skin is dry, but like maybe you put some oil on your hand and you just really focus on your sensations. Again, like coming into pleasure means you've got to come into your body. And so many people live outside in their head, right? Yeah. Which is important for business, no doubt, right? You've got to have your brain heavily firing. But you also need to be, and even especially in business, right? The more you come into your body, the more you can connect with your business intuition. And I always say, like, intuition, this is my experience in business. Every good choice I've ever made was a very intuitive hit that I couldn't necessarily explain to somebody, but I knew in my body that was the right choice to make, even though people looked at me and like, you're crazy. And I'm like, yeah, I know, but I'm still going to do it because it feels right. And that's because you're connected to your body and your pleasure center. And then you have access to that energy that sits within us.
Yeah. Well, let's talk a little bit about the being in the body part of it, because I think that's unfortunately very common that many of us live from the neck up. Because it's not safe to be in our body. So for me, I had a background that was very chaotic and traumatic in very many ways. Incest, sexual abuse, various things like that, as well as other, violence, etc. And so to stay safe and sane and so forth, that little girl basically took me out of being in the experience fully. And it took me a long time to come back to my body. And in fact, I'm not even sure if I am fully back in my body. For quite a long time, I didn't recognize where the edges of my body were because I wasn't present in them. I'd run into doors and stuff because I didn't realize where I ended. Certainly didn't experience a lot of pleasure in my body. Didn't, had food issues. So there was it's taken a long time for this to be a safe place. And for it not to be, like often people have weight, it's about protection. It's a way to keep people at a distance, especially men, especially sexuality. So coming back into our body takes work. Like I've done lots of workshops and therapy and personal growth and counseling and so forth and so on. And still need some more work on that, but it's a process. What I find is that there's a direct correlation for me between trusting myself because I have boundaries and it being supposed to be in my body. Mm-hmm. Of course, I was not allowed to say no.
Right.
That's what part of the training was, right? Don't tell, don't say anything, can't say anything. And so not having boundaries and not growing up with a mother who had boundaries, that's been my biggest challenge, is to create those so that I could trust I would take care of myself. Tell us a little bit more about boundaries and as it relates to business and sex and our bodies and all of that.
Yeah, great question. So yes, everything that you're saying is absolutely true. Anybody who has had any type of abuse, trauma, they have a very, very hard time with boundaries for the reasons that you just said, right? And as a trauma practitioner, when I work with somebody with trauma, the very, very first thing we do is work on boundaries. because for some people, it is very, very challenging, for most of them, to be able to even say no to me, right? And to really understand what a boundary is. But boundaries keep us safe. And boundaries are, and yes, if you have no boundaries, like you are not safe in your body. That is absolutely true. And if you've had trauma, you are not safe in your body. And the dissociation that you're talking about is what happens for most people when they have trauma and start feeling unsafe. They just leave your body, which was the best protective mechanism for you in the world when you were a little girl. But then we take that because it's now in our body, it's patterned in our neuronal pathways, and we take that into adult life, right? And so, people without boundaries have problems in business because they don't have boundaries. They can't say no to somebody. They can't say no to the client who's calling them up at 12 o'clock at night because they're in crisis, right? Like that is there. I've definitely seen a lot of women in particular really have boundaries. And I'm like, what are you doing? Like we agreed you weren't going to do this, and yet we do it again. And the same thing happens in sex, right? For a lot of women, it's very hard to have boundaries with their partner, to tell them no, right? To let them grab or do whatever that, grab for their boobs or whatever when it doesn't really feel good, but they're afraid of hurting their ego. And that is actually a boundary violation. So I always tell couples, in fact, I teach a practice, a Tantra practice, because I do incorporate some Tantra into all of my coaching, because I think it has some amazing aspects that are very helpful in intimacy and sex. But I always teach a practice, and part of that practice of creating sacred space is talking about your desires, your fears, and your boundaries. And 9 times out of 10, when we get to the boundary section, the couples have a really hard time even figuring out what a boundary is in the context of their relationship.
Right. Never mind with strangers and people that you need something from or want something from or think you do.
Exactly.
So first of all, is there any books that you would recommend or resources about boundary setting that you know of that you would recommend?
Seen anything that I love? There was a book on boundaries, but it was a faith-based book that I read a couple of years ago, and I was like, yeah, no, this isn't resonating with me. So I don't know that I can give you any good resources specifically on boundaries, but I can get back to you. Okay.
And one of the things that I hope you've heard in this is, if you are not present in your body, and most of you will know that consciously. If you may not know it consciously, you may just have experiences of not being sure, not being able to trust, not feeling safe. Obviously, it's a deeper issue, and it requires support. It requires counseling or therapy, someone informed in trauma work who can keep you safe while you come back into your body and help you develop those boundaries. Boundaries, like you said, in business are super important. And I was, as I was listening to you, I was thinking, it's not just the no, it's also the yes, because sometimes yes is a boundary as well. Saying yes to ourselves means setting a boundary about where there may be some no's or whatever. But having what I call a free yes or a free no, not one based on obligation or shoulds or fear or any of those. So really, it's about being able to freely choose what we want and don't want.
Yes, I like that.
On that. And so, and obviously that comes into both business and sex and just pleasure in life in general. Like being able to say yes to ourselves. Yes, I want to go live a mobile lifestyle, so I'm going to sell my house and everything I own. Or yes, I want to, create my own business and so forth. So speaking, I'm going to switch tracks for just a second, because I can talk about this literally all day. It's a fascinating topic. I love your passion for it. What was it like for you to go from lawyer and employee, essentially, to being an entrepreneur, especially at 50, whatever you were when you made that leap? What was that like for you? What was the biggest challenge?
Yeah, so it's interesting because I actually was an entrepreneur before I made the leap, but it was different. I had started my own healthcare consulting company. But I was working for like pharmaceutical companies and not-for-profit organizations, but I wasn't actually like I had to promote myself, but it wasn't the same as promoting myself, right? And so for me, that transition was terrifying. It was terrifying because, first of all, like, I had been doing what I'd been doing for 40 years, whatever, 35 years of my life. Like, I really knew my shit. I knew the healthcare world. I knew the fundraising world. I knew the not-for-profit world. I knew the pharmaceutical world. I didn't know anything about sex and intimacy, let alone coaching. Like, how could I actually help somebody when I was just getting over feeling so broken myself? So there was a lot of, oh my God, imposter syndrome. Honestly, it's taken me a decade to get over imposter syndrome. I've been doing this for 15 years. And I think like about 5 years ago when my book came out in 2018, and it won, awards, and it just did so well. And I got letters from people and I'm like, okay, maybe I'm not an imposter anymore. But I think that's one of the huge issues that so many entrepreneurs face, right? It's just feeling like that imposter syndrome, like I'm not nearly good enough. Like I'm not, constantly comparing myself to my peers, my colleagues, to people that have been doing this for 10 years, to Esther Perel. So that was really, really hard. Marketing, I was actually pretty good at marketing, but again, marketing Xanet Pailet. Whoa, that was really a different experience, especially because I knew how sensitive the work is that I wanted to do with people. So, I mean, it was scary. It was really, really scary. And I worried every month whether I was going to, make my nut. But I worked hard. Like I worked my ass off. I held workshops. I was in the Bay Area of California, which is a very sex positive area at that point. And I probably did some things I wouldn't do again. But you got to do what you got to do, when you're living independently for the first time in your life ever. And you want to be successful because, I'm a driven person.
Yes. Okay. Well, now I got to ask, what were those things that you did that you wouldn't do again?
Oh, I don't know if I can even say this. Well, I guess I would say that at the time when I first started working, I was initially trained doing more hands-on work. And so I did advertising in some less respectable publications as a sex and intimacy coach. Right. So I don't know that I would do that again. I had all these like boudoir pictures. I mean, I had a really hot body back then. I had all these boudoir pictures and I put some of them up. And so, it was getting male clients for me was easy. And that's how my business got started. But, I don't know knowing what I know now and maybe some of the risks I might have taken. I don't know that I would have done that, gone down that road.
Well, and hindsight's 2020, and like you said, when we start out, we really do have to just throw stuff at the wall, see what sticks and what works. And hustle. We need to hustle a bit to get things going and to clarify what works for us and what doesn't. That's part of the learning boundaries too, right? Is
totally.
What do I want? What don't I want? What it does feel okay? What doesn't feel okay? And, the advantage of getting older is we get, in theory, smarter or wiser. In theory, not necessarily. It's not a given. But I've met a lot of really uninformed and unaware older people. But there is that possibility. Okay, so you have a gift for people. So tell us about that.
Do. So my free gift you will find at this website, howtoimprovemylovelife.com. And in there, you will have access to my 20 Minutes to Better Sex. Which is essentially 7 3-minute videos with very specific tools and tips to improve your sex life. And then you will also have access to me as well. If you would like to set up a call with me, chat about what you heard about on the podcast, I'm available through that as well.
Yeah, because really, truly, we've only been able to kind of scratch the surface in this conversation. It is so big in terms of the pervasiveness in our society of these subtle and not so subtle conditionings and messages that still persist to this day. Many young women would listen to this and go, yeah, no, that's not a thing. It's still a thing. If you look at magazines, you look at the women get depressed within, 36 seconds of reading a fashion magazine or something like that, or it's something very short, 2 minutes in, your dopamine drops significantly because we get these constant messages of objectification that our value comes from our body and from our beauty and from its service or being available for the pleasure of other people and of men. It's still a prevalent and pervasive societal message. And of course, that impacts how we think of our value, which then permeates our business and what we think we can charge and how we think we can show up in the world and, how big we can be and how expressive we can be. And so I really appreciate you talking about this, writing about this. Oh, by the way, I was looking for the book title that she was talking about is Living an Orgasmic Life. I'm going to go grab it right away. And I think is it best to get it from your website or from Amazon?
No, it's not on my website. Go to Amazon.
Okay. Yeah. Amazon, Living an Orgasmic Life by Xanet Pailet. Yeah.
Xanet Pailet.
And that's, for those of you who are listening, spelled Xanet Pailet. So, because otherwise you'll never find it. And so what I would highly recommend is that you really sit with this, maybe journal about it, maybe contemplate it, share this podcast episode with as many people as possible, whether you think this is an issue for them or not. I guarantee it probably is. Well, thank you for it, because even just hearing us talk about the fact that it's okay to talk about this, it's okay to consider this, it's okay to recognize that you're not alone and that there are options, that you can heal wounds, you can find resources, you can get people to support you with being able to be fully present and expressed and in control of who we are and our experience in the world. So please, please, please do whatever work you need to do. Get a counselor, get a therapist, get someone to support you with this, read about it. Years ago, I read a book by Sherry Huber, who is a nun, called Sex and Money Are Dirty, Aren't They? And it's like a little workbook that you write out beliefs in. If you can get a hold of that, it's a really good little introspection tool. And it flips over, sex is on one side, money is on the other side. Or these days, use ChatGPT and get it to ask you questions about your beliefs around sex and money and so forth, because they limit us. We need new stories. And friends, I say this all the time. We're making it all up anyway. So make up better stories. Right? There is no objective truth, reality. There is what happened, and there's the story we tell about it. And the story takes us closer to being who we want to be or further away. So make up a better story. If you would like to access Xanet's tool, go to the Vault on the Maturepreneur podcast. Go to the Vault, and on the Purpose and Profit Sisterhood podcast, it'll be in the show notes. The Vault is our gathering of gifts. So you go log in there, and then you can get not only opt in for Xanet's gift, but also other speakers and their gifts and what you find that might be beneficial for you. So it's like a whole little mini giveaway. Go in there and grab whatever gifts you want, and you'll see other episodes of this show that will inspire you. So go to the Vault to get that gift. Or to the show notes. Thank you so much for listening, and thank you for being here, Xanet. And I appreciate, again, someone willing to have such a frank, honest, open conversation around this. Could talk to you for hours, but what's one thing you'd like to leave people with?
Okay, so what I want to leave everybody with is this maxim: pleasure is your birthright.
Mm.
You were born to have pleasure. You're entitled to have pleasure. It's powerful for you to be able to have pleasure. It will change your life. Don't forget that pleasure is your birthright. And if you're not having pleasure, then you need to do something about it.
Mm. And the only thing I'm going to add to that is, and it's never, ever too late or too
Never.
Never too late, never too early. Thank you so much for listening. Please pass on this episode. Please subscribe so that others get the pleasure of listening to this. Thanks so much, Xanet. Take care, everybody. Have a pleasurable week. Thank you for listening. I'd love it if you left a comment and subscribed. And I encourage you to apply one aha from this interview right away so you can turn your wisdom into wealth and your contribution into positive change. Bye for now.